At my brother's birthday, my mother raised her glass and said, "To our golden boy and to his sister who will buy him the BMW he deserves." The crowd laughed. I said no. That's when my father's hand hit my face. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was the kind of vacuum that happens when reality shifts, when a family's carefully constructed facade cracks wide open in front of 20 guests. The champagne glass slipped from my hand, shattering against the stone patio in crystalline fragments that caught the string lights overhead. My cheek burned where his palm had connected, but what stung worse was seeing our neighbors' shocked faces. Understanding, finally registering that this wasn't some elaborate family joke. My mother's stage smile froze mid-performance. "Jennifer, honey, you're making a scene," she whispered through clenched teeth, her voice carrying that dangerous sweetness that meant I was supposed to apologize, laugh it off, restore the perfect family image she'd spent decades crafting. But I didn't apologize. For the first time in 22 years, I stood there bleeding from where my teeth had cut my lip and looked at them exactly as they were. Beautiful, polished, and completely certain I would never fight back. They had no idea who they were dealing with. You see, what my family never bothered to learn about me was that I wasn't just their compliant daughter who fetched snacks for my brother's friends and worked at the local library. I was 3 months away from completing my master's degree in financial forensics with a 3.9 GPA and a job offer from Blackstone and Associates waiting for me after graduation. I'd spent the last 2 years learning exactly how family financial abuse worked, how to trace hidden assets, and how court systems handled trust fund violations. More importantly, they had no idea that I'd been documenting everything. Growing up in the Hale household meant living inside a perfectly curated performance. From the street, our colonial looked like something from a real estate magazine. White columns, manicured lawn, American flag catching the breeze just right. Neighbors would smile and wave, commenting on what a lovely family we seemed to be. They couldn't see past the fresh paint to the suffocating control underneath. My father, Richard, ran Hale Construction, with the same iron-fisted precision he brought home every evening. He managed our family like a building project, every emotion measured and trimmed, every choice subject to his approval. Success in our house meant following his blueprint exactly, no deviations allowed. My mother, Victoria, was the decorator of that illusion, speaking in gentle tones that made cruelty sound like caring concern. "I only want what's best for you," she'd say, right before deciding what that was without asking me. My brother Aiden was their masterpiece, the golden project they'd built everything around. Star quarterback in high school, business major at State, everything came easy to him because our parents cleared every obstacle from his path. My father called him the Hale Legacy. My mother called him the reason we work so hard. They never said what I was, but I understood. Someone had to hold the spotlight steady while he shined in it. When my grandfather, Harold Rowan, passed away last year, he left me something that didn't fit their perfect blueprint. A personal trust fund worth $84,000, designed to be released when I turned 24 or earlier if I faced documented hardship. Grandpa had pulled me aside at Christmas 2 years before he died, his voice raspy but determined. "Freedom needs a backup plan, Jenny. Keep yours safe. These people love control more than they love you." I was 19 when I learned about the trust. My father dismissed it as unnecessary complications. My mother smiled thinly and said, "Families don't keep secrets from each other, dear." But after that conversation, they began treating me differently, like a resource to be managed rather than a daughter to be loved. By age 22, I was finishing my graduate program while working part-time at the public library, living at home to save money. Every evening I'd come back to find Aiden holding court at the kitchen island with his fraternity brothers, loud and careless. "Jen, grab us some beers," he'd shout, and I'd comply without thinking. Peace was easier than confrontation, and I was focused on bigger goals. The BMW conversation had been building for weeks. It started with my mother casually mentioning that Aiden's 21st birthday deserved something special. Then I found a glossy brochure on my desk, BMW 3 Series models with financing options, highlighted, my name scribbled on a Post-it note stuck to the cover. When I asked about it, my mother had smiled that dangerous smile. Just exploring options, sweetheart, for family harmony. Family harmony. Those words hung in our house like expensive perfume. Sweet, suffocating, impossible to escape. The pressure escalated at dinner the following week. My father set down his fork with deliberate precision, the sound sharp against the china. It's time you contributed something meaningful to this family, Jennifer. Success should stay in the family. His tone carried that quiet certainty that meant the decision was already made. You'll handle Aiden's car situation. That's what responsible daughters do. But sitting in that emergency room 3 hours after the birthday party, watching a nurse document the split lip and finger-shaped bruises along my jaw, I remembered something else my grandfather had said. If they ever make you choose between peace and dignity, choose dignity. Peace built on obedience isn't peace. It's a cage. The ER was all fluorescent lights and antiseptic smells. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from my mother, 12 missed calls and increasingly frantic texts about how I'd embarrassed the family and needed to come home and discuss this rationally. A text from Aiden simply read, "You ruined everything." I deleted them without responding. Officer Rivera showed up around midnight, her badge catching the harsh hospital lighting. She looked at the documented bruises, the witness statements from neighbors who'd seen the incident, and asked the question that changed everything. "Do you feel safe going home tonight?" The honest answer was no. But what she didn't know was that I'd been preparing for this moment for months. Mrs. Kemp from the library had become something of a mentor during my graduate studies. She'd survived her own financial abuse situation decades earlier and recognized the signs in my family dynamic. When she appeared at the hospital discharge desk at 2 a.m., I wasn't entirely surprised. "You don't have to go back there," she said quietly, pressing a business card into my palm. "There are people who know how to handle situations like this." The card belonged to Janet Blackstone from Blackstone and Associates, the same firm that had offered me a position after graduation. Mrs. Kemp drove me to a budget motel near the highway, handed me her extra phone charger, and said something I'll never forget. "Sometimes the best thing you can do for abusive people is stop enabling their behavior. You're not helping them by accepting it." Alone in that motel room, I opened my laptop and accessed the files I'd been quietly building for 8 months. As part of my financial forensics coursework, I'd been required to analyze a real case study of family financial abuse. With my professor's permission, I'd chosen my own family. The evidence was devastating. My parents had been accessing my trust fund for over 2 years, making unauthorized withdrawals totaling $31,847. They'd used my grandfather's money for home renovations, a vacation to Aruba, and donations to my father's business association that directly benefited his construction company. They'd forged my signature on 3 separate occasions and had been charging personal expenses to a credit card linked to the trust account. Every transaction was documented. Every forged signature was photographed. Every violation was cataloged with timestamps and bank records. I'd learned to be thorough in my forensics program, and I'd been building a bulletproof case without even realizing it. I sent everything to Janet Blackstone with a subject line that cut straight to the point. Trust fund fraud case, Harold Rowan estate, requesting emergency intervention. Her response came 20 minutes later. "Jennifer, I've reviewed your evidence. This is clear-cut financial abuse with criminal implications. I'm activating the hardship clause in your grandfather's trust immediately. Do not go home. Do not contact them directly. We're taking control of this situation." For the first time since that champagne glass shattered, I smiled. What my family had never bothered to learn about me was that financial forensics isn't just about numbers. It's about patterns of control, documentation of abuse, and strategic deployment of legal remedies. They saw a quiet library worker who fetched them snacks and paid for groceries without complaining. I was actually a trained professional 3 weeks away from a master's degree, with expertise in exactly the crimes they'd been committing against me. Janet Blackstone was a partner at the city's most respected financial crimes law firm, with 23 years of experience prosecuting family financial abuse cases. More importantly, she was the attorney my grandfather had specifically recommended in a sealed letter attached to his will, a letter I was only supposed to receive if the hardship clause was activated. "Your grandfather was a smart man," Janet told me during our first official meeting the next morning. "He suspected this might happen and built multiple safeguards into your trust structure. They've been stealing from you for years, but more than that, they've been violating federal banking regulations by forging documents. The hardship clause was brilliant in its simplicity. Any documented physical abuse, financial coercion, or forged signature automatically triggered full trust control transfer to me, plus punitive damages calculated at 150% of any unauthorized withdrawals. My grandfather had also included a provision for living expenses and legal fees, meaning I could afford to fight this properly. Here's what's going to happen," Janet explained, spreading documents across her conference table. "We're freezing all accounts they have access to, transferring complete trust control to you, and filing both civil and criminal complaints. The forged signatures alone carry felony charges. The financial abuse qualifies for enhanced penalties under state law. They picked the wrong person to steal from." But the most satisfying part was yet to come. That afternoon, Janet accompanied me to the family home for what my parents thought would be a reconciliation meeting. They'd arranged the living room carefully, fresh flowers, family photos prominently displayed, my mother in her best pearls. They expected their wayward daughter to come crawling back with an apology. Instead, they got served with a restraining order and a criminal complaint. "Mr. and Mrs. Hale," Janet began, settling into their expensive leather chair without invitation, "I'm Janet Blackstone, representing your daughter in a financial abuse case. You're being charged with fraudulent access to trust funds, forgery, and criminal financial exploitation of a family member." The color drained from my father's face so fast I thought he might collapse. My mother's carefully applied makeup couldn't hide how her hands started shaking. Aiden, sprawled on the couch, scrolling through his phone, looked up in confusion. "This is ridiculous," my father blustered. "We're her family. We've been managing that money responsibly." Janet opened her briefcase with deliberate precision. "Mr. Hale, you've withdrawn $31,847 from your daughter's trust without authorization. You forged her signature on bank documents 3 times. You used her money for personal vacations and business expenses. These are felony charges in this state." She spread the evidence across their coffee table. Bank statements, forged signatures, photographs of unauthorized withdrawals, documented patterns of financial abuse. Your daughter has been building this case for 8 months as part of her graduate studies in financial forensics. She's graduating next month with expertise in exactly the crimes you've been committing against her. My mother tried her gentle manipulation voice. "Honey, please, we're family. Let's not destroy ourselves over money." I looked at her with perfect calm. "It was never about money, it was about choice. You've never let me have one." Janet handed over the final documents, a comprehensive restraining order that prohibited them from contacting me, accessing any accounts with my name, or coming within 500 feet of my new apartment. The trust is now under complete control of Miss Hale. All unauthorized access has been reported to federal banking authorities. Criminal charges will be filed Monday morning. The silence in that room was different from the one at the birthday party. This wasn't shock. This was the moment they realized they'd been playing chess with someone who understood the game better than they did. "You can't be serious about pressing charges," my father said, his voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. I'm a respected businessman in this community." "You were," Janet replied simply. "Financial crimes tend to impact professional reputations quite severely, especially when they involve exploiting your own daughter." Aiden finally spoke up, confusion clear in his voice. "Jen, you're not actually going to sue Mom and Dad over some money, are you?" I turned to face him directly. "Aiden, you used the trust credit card last month to pay your fraternity fees. That's $847 of my grandfather's money that you spent without asking. Dad said it was fine, but it wasn't his money to approve." The realization hit him like cold water. Every casual expense, every assumption that family money was communal property, every entitled swipe of that credit card, it had all been theft. "The BMW you expected me to buy you would have cost $34,000. I continued. "Money I never agreed to spend from a trust you never had permission to access. You've all been spending my inheritance for 2 years like it was your personal checking account." Janet stood, gathering the documents into her briefcase. "Miss Hale will be living independently from now on. Any contact attempts will be considered violation of the restraining order. Criminal proceedings begin Monday. I'd recommend you hire appropriate legal representation." The next 6 weeks transformed everything. The criminal charges generated a local news story. Construction company owner charged in family financial abuse case. My father's business reputation crumbled overnight. 3 major contracts were canceled when clients learned about the felony charges. His construction company, built over 20 years, was hemorrhaging money and credibility. My mother's social circle turned cold with stunning speed. The charity organizations where she'd been a prominent donor suddenly had no room for someone associated with financial crimes. Her carefully cultivated image as a pillar of the community became a liability no one wanted to associate with. Aiden's consequences were swift and merciless. The university's financial aid office reviewed his records after learning about the criminal case. Using fraudulently obtained funds for educational expenses meant his scholarship was immediately revoked. He had to withdraw from school and move back home, a home that was now under financial siege because of legal fees and lost business. But the most satisfying consequence was watching their perfect family facade completely disintegrate under public scrutiny. Neighbors who'd smiled and waved for years suddenly knew exactly what happened behind those white columns and manicured hedges. The family that had looked so lovely from the street revealed itself to be built on theft, abuse, and carefully hidden cruelty. Meanwhile, my new life exceeded every expectation I'd hardly dared to have. The trust fund, now under my complete control, provided more than enough for a security deposit on a decent apartment near campus. Janet Blackstone's firm offered me a full-time position immediately after graduation, with a starting salary of $67,000 and a clear path toward partnership for associates who showed exceptional skill in financial forensics. My professors were so impressed with the real-world case study I'd built that they recommended me for a fast-track certification program with the state's Financial Crimes Unit. 3 months after that birthday party disaster, I was living in a bright apartment with exposed brick walls, walking to work at one of the city's most prestigious law firms, and building expertise in exactly the field where I could help other people escape the kinds of financial abuse I'd endured. My grandfather's backup plan had worked perfectly, but more than that, it had revealed capabilities I hadn't known I possessed. The quiet, compliant daughter who fetched snacks and avoided confrontation turned out to be a methodical strategist with professional training in the exact weapons needed to dismantle financial abuse. The final court hearing was scheduled for a rainy Tuesday in October. Janet had prepared me thoroughly, but walking into that courtroom and seeing my parents at the defendant's table still felt surreal. They looked smaller somehow, diminished by months of legal pressure and financial consequences. The judge reviewed the evidence with barely concealed disgust. This case represents a particularly egregious example of family financial abuse, she stated for the record. The defendants systematically exploited their daughter's trust for personal benefit, forged legal documents, and committed fraud totaling nearly $32,000. The victim's brilliant documentation of these crimes demonstrates both the defendant's consistent pattern of abuse and her remarkable resilience in building a case against her own family. The final judgment was comprehensive. Full restitution of stolen funds plus punitive damages, 3 years of court-supervised financial rehabilitation, community service focused on financial abuse, prevention, and permanent prohibition from accessing any accounts associated with my name or my grandfather's estate. More importantly, the criminal convictions meant my father's construction license was suspended. My mother faced federal banking fraud charges, and both of them carried permanent records that would follow them for the rest of their lives. 6 months later, I received a handwritten letter with no return address. Inside, my mother's familiar script. "We didn't know what we had until you were gone. We're sorry." I folded it carefully, placed it in my desk drawer, and never responded. Not because I was cruel, but because I no longer needed anything from them. Not money, not approval, not closure. I had everything I needed. The best revenge wasn't making them pay, though they certainly did. The best revenge was building a life so much better than anything they'd ever allowed me to envision that their apology became irrelevant. I didn't need them to acknowledge what they'd done wrong. I had court documents that proved it, professional success that validated my worth, and financial independence that meant their opinions carried no weight in my decisions. Today, I'm a senior associate at Blackstone and Associates, specializing in family financial abuse cases. I help people document patterns of exploitation, navigate complex trust law, and build bulletproof cases against relatives who mistake kindness for weakness. My apartment overlooks the city, my work saves lives, and my bank account reflects years of smart decisions made without anyone else's permission. Sometimes, when I drive past the old neighborhood, I see the for sale sign still planted in my parents' front yard. The house that looks so perfect from the street sits empty now, a monument to the difference between image and reality. They couldn't afford the mortgage after losing the construction business and paying legal fees, restitution, and fines. I don't feel guilty about their consequences. I feel proud of their daughter who learned to fight back professionally, methodically, and completely. They raised me to be obedient, but they accidentally taught me to be thorough. When I finally decided to use that thoroughness against them, they discovered that the quiet girl who fetched snacks had grown into a woman who understood exactly how to dismantle financial abuse. The last I heard, they were renting a small apartment across town, working retail jobs to pay court-ordered restitution, and telling anyone who'd listen that their daughter had destroyed the family over money. They still don't understand that it was never about money. It was about power, respect, and the right to make my own choices with my own inheritance. I kept my grandfather's backup plan safe, just like he'd asked, but more importantly, I learned to build my own.